Thank you all for coming today. It's a very distinguished panel, I must say. We've got two members of the, I think the most influential people on the right, the top 100 here, is Andrea and Tim. And Otto, of course, as many of you probably know, represents the institutional investors in our economy. That's a very important position, so I feel honoured to be part of such a powerful gathering, and I hope we can catapult Andrea and Tim up the rankings. My way of looking at these things is through history, really. And when I wrote my piece for the CPS on quantitative easing, which incidentally is a most dull way of describing what is frankly quite an important subject, I decided to look at history. And the first thing I learned is that actually printing money is a very conventional and established way of dealing with a financial crisis as opposed to a regular recession. And in fact, it's actually a conservative policy. It was invented by William Pitt. Cast your mind back to 1797. We're at war with France, as usual. And Napoleon has just seized Italy. And there was a conspiracy to disrupt the British economy by the French by allying themselves with the Irish, who were rebelling, as usual. And an invasion was set forth, 2,000 soldiers. Last time Britain was invaded, they appeared on the coast of Pembrokeshire. And when reports reached London that these Frenchmen had appeared, there was a panic. And the Bank of England was already overextended because of lending money to our allies. And the bank system was already in a skittish state because of all the rumours that had been running down. And immediately a run began on the banks. And Pitt's response was to suspend the link of the pound to gold and to print money. And by all accounts, got us through that crisis. The next time it happened, 1825, just after we'd gone back on the gold standard. What happened was there was a boom after Waterloo, and all the what we would call as emerging markets became independent in South America, countries like Chile. And they came to the London markets and launched bond issues for the first time. And there was a boom in these emerging market bonds. But the thing is it was a very primitive market, and a fraudster called Gregor McGregor, spotting his opportunity, invented a fake country called Poye, that no one had heard of, and issued an entirely bogus bond for this country. People snapped it up because there was a frenzy, a bubble, I guess you would call it. And when it became clear this was a fraud, the stock market plunged, bond prices plunged, and a run again began on the banks. And a bank called Paul Thornton in particular got into difficulty. And again, they printed money. And they gave an emergency loan to this bank called Paul Thornton. And that is often thought to be the origins of modern central banking, whereby when there's a crisis, the central bank makes money available to the banks. The third time we had printing of money was actually 1914. Declared war. The stock exchange, strangely, had not been paying attention, was taken by surprise. And it was then closed for several days. And in the subsequent frenzy, Lloyd George decided, he was the Chancellor, that we should again print money. And the Bank of England resisted the idea. And so there was a row. They even threatened to take away the government's business and give it to the Midland Bank. But again, we had the printing of money. So that's my first way of looking at things. It is actually a well-established policy. However, what else do we learn from history? And this really brings to my second point, is that 2 out of those 3 occasions, we actually subsequently got inflation. The highest ever rate of inflation recorded in Britain, 36% in 1800, after the printing of money. The next highest rate, 25% in 1917, after the printing of money. Now, the reason inflation can gather force when you've printed money. And I think there's a good quote I'd just like to draw your attention to, is when they printed money in 1797, they didn't just do that. They went into the vaults of the Bank of England and they discovered loads of Spanish dollars, which in fact some of them Drake had stolen from the Spanish. And so what they did is they got them all out and they stamped clumsily over the top images of George III and released them into the market, and people didn't like them at all. And a wag said the bank, to make its Spanish dollars pass, stamped the head of a fool on the neck of an ass. And what I think that goes to show is that the first thing it does is it undermines confidence in the value of money. Now on this occasion, in fact, Birmingham had an important role to play because they then withdrew those Spanish dollars and they got, do I see that Fraser Nelson appearing? No. They got Matthew Bolton and James Watt at the Soho Mint, at the Soho Manufactory, just down the road from here, to properly overstrike those coins and using their patented steam press and make them into proper British coins. But I think that goes to show it undermines confidence. The other reason that inflation will get going is once you have printed money, you have an enormous stock of money out there in the economy, in circulation. And the way the money supply figures then grow is that once the economy picks up, the velocity of usage of that very high stock of money picks up, and suddenly inflation can accelerate. There's another point I'd like to make, and that is, I think there is a certain dishonesty at the heart of quantitative easing, and that is that there's a myth that it's actually a technical matter entirely reserved to the Bank of England, and only the monetary geniuses inside the Bank of England are fit to understand it and to analyse it and to assess it, as Andrea has said. Now, because it has, obviously, the printing of money and the buying up of gilts, an impact on the public finances. And it's a very important, powerful policy. And the Bank of England is an instrument, an agent of the government. It's quite obviously the case that it's also a matter for the executive branch of the government to consider, and for Parliament to consider. Now, I think the legal basis for quantitative easing is an important thing to understand, and that is that in 1797, it was done by order in council. So the king had to come back from Windsor, and he had to sign an emergency order of council late at night, so that was obviously properly an executive matter. In 1914, such was the ferocity of the row between the government and the Bank of England that actually the Treasury printed the money itself. It was actually Treasury money that was actually produced. So again, it was an executive thing. And in 1925, which is a lesser occasion, again, it was Lord Liverpool who gave the order to print money. But this time round, we're being told, oh no, it's a technical matter for the Bank of England. But it's not even true now, because the Bank of England's liabilities are underwritten by the Chancellor, and consequently there has to be this exchange of letters between the Chancellor and the Governor to authorise it. So this really brings me to my final point, and that is that I think that it's properly a matter that needs to be properly considered. And I'm absolutely delighted to hear that the Treasury Select Committee are going to be looking into it, because this is something, Tim, that we first called for. And what we want to see is the Bank of England being held properly accountable for this novel policy, and for it to be properly examined, and not for it to be just seen as a technical matter that is reserved entirely for them, because we don't want, again, to be the people that have had the head of a fool stamped on the neck of an ass. Thank you.